Hello, Weil Alumni. My name is Arianna Scavetti, and I'm a Complex Commercial Litigation partner in the Washington, D.C. office. I am also a massive sports fan. And so when I joined Weil, one of the things I loved about the firm was its rich history of interesting engagements in the sports industry. Even just recently, Weil has represented the National Women's Soccer League Players Association to investigate misconduct in professional women's soccer, is challenging Major League Baseball's antitrust exemption on behalf of minor league baseball teams, and is representing NBA basketball player Zion Williamson in litigation matters. Weil also, of course, has a number of alumni working in and around the sports industry, and I'm so excited today to be joined by one of those exceptional alumni. I'm pleased to introduce Jane Pollack, Legal SVP for Fanatics Betting and Gaming, a vertical of the digital sports platform and globally recognized consumer brand and supplier of most of my wardrobe outside of the office. Before joining Fanatics Betting and Gaming, Jane was Associate General Counsel at Uber, where she also led the enterprise commercial team. Jane started her career as an associate in the competition and intellectual property and media law practice groups at Weil. She is also a member of the Beacon Giving Group, a community of women committed to enhancing the lives and opportunities of underserved populations in the New York City area through grant making. Jane, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
Well, to start, can you tell us a little bit about your role at Fanatics Betting and Gaming? What are you spending your time on these days?
So I only joined about 4 months ago, and the week that I joined was the week that we opened our first retail sportsbook in the Commander Stadium, only retail sportsbook in a football stadium, NFL football stadium. Since then, we've launched our mobile sportsbook in beta in Ohio and Tennessee. So it's been a very busy 4 months, just learning how the products operate, getting them ready for launch, drafting terms and conditions, reviewing marketing, and establishing a lot of internal processes and policies, for employees, for consumers, and what have you. It's also been getting to know the company and its people. So a lot of learning.
Absolutely. And I think, when you look at the betting and gaming space and how it has developed over the past few years, there's been a really interesting patchwork of state laws and frameworks, and it seems to me like it's changing all the time. Have there been surprises and challenges along the way that have come with that?
So I will say this is a new industry for me. And I knew it was state law regulated. I knew it was obviously a very new industry just with PASPA being overturned, a few years ago. But I have been surprised at how different some of the laws are. Every state, there are different requirements on advertising, different requirements on licensing. There really are just a lot of differences. And then you layer on privacy laws, which, as vary greatly state by state. So we have to tailor, whether it be our house rules or our terms of service to the individual states in which we're operating. And that's done, on a one-by-one basis. The other thing I will say is this is the newest company that I've ever worked for. I started my in-house career at a company at Citi, so that was over 200 years old. Then Uber was at least over 10, what was about 10 years old when I started. And now we're like almost sort of 2, maybe 1.
I know, throughout your career, you've been very involved in marketing and advertising, as well as business development. Can you give us some background about your work in the field?
Of course. So the advertising absolutely started at Weil. And when I was a second year, I started working on a number of false advertising cases, many of them with Randy Singer, who I know is still a partner at Weil. And that was such a great experience because the cases are very short. There's a beginning, middle, and an end. They're intense. You learn a lot about an industry and you learn a lot about strategy. And I found that all very interesting. And it taught me to look at an ad and think about, what are the claims in the ad? Are they substantiated? Are there material omissions? What else do you need to consider? And so I was able to leverage that experience to my job at Citi. And they liked the fact that I had a consumer protection background, even though I really didn't have a deal background. And then once I went to Citi, where I was a lawyer at the time for the rewards programs, I started to work on some of their advertising matters, do sponsorship deals and talent deals. And you realize that marketing law is unique because you can do litigation and you can do investigations and you can do counseling and you can do deal work. And there are not as many areas of the law that do all of that. So as I was doing the deal work, it began to change from what would be a pure sponsorship to something like a real strategic partnership, like City Bike. And when I went to Uber, that's when I began to do more business development deals because those are really strategic partnerships. So really, it all started with false advertising cases and grew from there.
I've done a number of false advertising cases as well. And what I love is how it kind of forces you to think about, how does an average person read something separate and apart from how we think about it as lawyers and sort of parse the language in that way. Has that been part of your work at, Fanatics as well?
A bit, obviously gaming advertising is $1 billion industry for sports betting ads. I mean, if you watch the Super Bowl, I'm sure everyone saw there were many, many sports betting ads. So it's definitely a component of it. And I think, going back to the state regulators, all of the state regulators will say your ads can't be unfair and deceptive. And so it's very, back to FTC Act as well. So when you're looking at advertising that we're creating, we're thinking about that, what are the interpretations of the claim? Could someone misread this? And then, of course, all the specific gaming rules and making sure that we have a responsible gaming disclosure and the gambling hotline as well.
Thinking back to your time at Weil, are there lessons or experiences that have been particularly influential in your career or in your work?
So it's funny, I had drinks with my summer associate office mate about a month and a half ago, and we were talking about our time at the firm. And I think for me, it was really, Weil was where I became a lawyer. Like, yes, I've gone to law school, but I spent about 5 years at Weil, and it's how I learned to practice. It's how I learned to be a professional. It was my first real job. And there's so many lessons that I can think of from that time. One of which is it's okay to ask questions, and you should ask questions. When you're in a meeting, even if you're the person that they're calling upon for advice, if you don't know something, admit that, ask a question, and have faith that you're just going to figure it out. And I really value that lesson. I think it's something, particularly for junior attorneys, that's important. It's an important thing to learn. And when you're at a firm like Weil and you're working with just people who are so unbelievably smart, and you see them ask questions and figure it out on the fly, that is just such a wonderful role model of behavior.
It's such an important lesson for young attorneys too. People coming up through the ranks. Questions are good. It's how you develop. I think that's a great lesson. I know you also worked with Weil senior partner and really just legal legend Ira Millstein on corporate governance matters during your time. What do you recall from that experience, and how has it sort of impacted you as an attorney today?
Well, I should say Ira was certainly someone who taught me the lesson I just described about it's okay to ask questions. I mean, it was a privilege to work for him, especially as a junior attorney. I remember he would take me along to things. So I prepped him for a meeting with a CEO and a GC of a rather large company. And we went to the meeting, and then we're in the car coming back, and he turns to me and he says, "So how long have you been with us now?" I said to him, "Not quite a year." He looked at me and goes, "Well, you're in way over your head, aren't you?" And I laughed. I said, "Yes, but it's never boring." And he liked that answer and thought it was funny, but it was true. He really taught so much by letting you watch him work. And it was phenomenal. And I learned not just about corporate governance, but how to talk to a client, how to give advice, how to help a client make a decision, how to make it seem like the client was reaching that decision on their own and it was their idea, and kind of letting them have ownership of that. I got to work on very interesting matters, but just watching him was the best part. And that did mean that, on Saturday mornings at 6 a.m., the phone would ring. And that was part of it. That was what everyone talked about with, when you worked for Ira. But I'm just so impressed with everything that he's done. And it's been really wonderful just to kind of keep up with what he's done. I saw him back in September, and, he's busy working, still talking about the Central Park Conservancy and the Einstein School of Medicine, and, his corporate governance center at Columbia. It's funny because two of my other mentors, Ann Robinson and Kiera Gomes, are actually on the board. So I feel like it's a very full circle of people that I just admire so much. So
that's great. That's great. I imagine some of those lessons too about how to engage with clients were probably helpful in making the transition from being in the firm context to going in-house and navigating some of those business challenges. Is that sort of consistent with your experience?
Oh, absolutely. Because I think one of the things that is true of Ira is how practical he is. He's a problem solver. And I think that that's the biggest thing that you are in-house. You're solving problems and working on issues, and you need to be really practical. You don't have time to do a ton of research and to write a legal memo and do the type of analysis that you would at a firm. You need to be able to give advice, make it super clear, and actionable. And I think, I would see Ira do that, in a board meeting, one-on-one. Obviously, he knew just a tremendous amount, so he didn't need to do the research, but that practical component of this makes sense and here's why, yes, a very key lesson to being in-house.
And another, I think, great lesson for associates too, thinking about being solution oriented and understanding your client's needs on the ground. I think that's great.
Yeah, absolutely. As the client, you have to live with the aftermath of the litigation, or you have to live with the deal. And I think knowing that is very helpful.
Yeah. Well, I'm sure Fanatics keeps you plenty busy, but, what do you do away from work?
So it's definitely been busy. It's always busy starting a new job, but, I'm still able to see friends, go out for dinner, celebrated the coronation with high tea this weekend, reading, travel, theater. There's some great shows on. So enjoying New York.
That's great. Are you a big sports fan? Have you become a bigger sports fan through this?
I am a sports fan. It's very funny because I'm not a football fan. So it was very strange. Everyone's talking about football and I'm like, oh my goodness, I need to study up. But basketball and baseball are much more my sports. I was a huge fan of the Mets. And then when I went to City, more on the Mets. So I'm excited now that we have baseball season, and I'm excited that we're in the NBA finals and there's some really good games.
Yep. Well, I don't approve of the Mets fan. I'm a big Phillies fan myself, but I think we're all happy to have baseball season back and be able to get to the ballpark. Well, Jane, it's been so great chatting with you and hearing a little bit about this position. I think we're all excited to see how it evolves and develops over the coming years. Thanks so much for taking the time to share some of your accomplishments with us, and we really appreciate you being here.
Thank you so much. It was lovely to meet you.
Weil Alumni, stay well and keep an eye out for more programming coming soon. Thanks for your time.